Hi, in this presentation we want to talk about the topography of the Holy Land. Geography has implications for politics as well as culture. And so as we look at geography, it relates to how it shapes the people and their political experience. First thing to note is that modern-day Israel, which is actually bigger than ancient Israel, modern-day Israel is not very large. It's about the size of New Jersey. You can see to the left I've situated in the blue the outline of Israel in the United States. So you can comparatively see that it's a very small sliver of the world, but it, as we've talked about before, has had significant implications in terms of world history and continues to do so. Biblical Israel was even smaller. It was basically about 150 miles long and 75 miles wide. The classic description of Israel, that means both the northern kingdom of Israel and southern nation of Judah, so the united monarchy boundaries of Israel, were from Dan to Beersheba. We see that reference in the Bible time and time again when they're trying to describe the length of Israel from Dan to Beersheba. To give you some sense of how big is that, maybe a point of reference, it's 158 miles from Kenosha to Green Bay and 79 miles from Milwaukee to Madison. So if you were to drive in those two different directions, that'd be longer than Israel in the ancient world. This map here gives you a sense of the topography. This relief map shows that if you put a marble up there by Mount Hermon, it would run down towards the Dead Sea. Dramatic change in sea level. As you can see, Mount Hermon is actually 9,232 feet above sea level, and we go all the way down to the Dead Sea, the lowest point in the world, and it is 1,412 feet below sea level. So we're looking at about 10,600 feet difference between Mount Hermon, the highest point in Israel, to the Dead Sea. And as we've already talked about, that's the Rift Valley going right down the Jordan River, two tectonic plates that are rubbing against each other. And this is also part of the reason why we have this dramatic difference between mountainous areas and also valleys. One of the significant aspects of the geography and the topography of Israel is that it affects trade routes. So as you can see here, trying to give you the ancient trade routes, and first off, you can see over here by Euphrates rivers. So here we'd have ancient Assyria, and farther to the right would be Babylon and also Persia. Down here we have to the south, we have Egypt. And so these trade routes are linking together the great two river civilizations, and we should add up to the north here, modern-day Turkey, which would be where the Hittites kingdom existed. So as we already talked about, we have a bottleneck here in between, and you can see the trade routes running along the Euphrates or across other ways to Damascus. Number one, you can see the key role that Damascus plays, which is obviously modern-day Syria. And you can see the trade route coming down to Hazor or Hatzor, which is in modern-day Israel. A key site because it controlled this valley here, the Hula Valley, that existed right down here, which would be another trade route. But of course, this trade route coming here. And you can see how the ancient trade route went along down to the Sea of Galilee, and then came on down to, and right here we have the Megiddo, or as you might know it from the New Testament, Armageddon. This critical juncture point that if you control that, you control, as you can see, the trade routes not just coming from the north, but also from the west, because right here we have the Jezreel Valley. And that was another major trade route that would go east and then could go down to Jerusalem. The most dominant trade route was coming from Damascus to Hatzor, and then through Megiddo, and then coming on down through here, the Via Maris, or the Way of the Sea. There's also, along the sea coast, you can see a trade route that would come on down this way as well. But in terms of what linked really Egypt to Assyria, this route through Damascus, through Hatzor, down through Megiddo, and then following through down into Egypt. I want to talk a little bit about the Jezreel Valley, because what's very interesting is that you have Nazareth right about here, right here, and along this range of mountains right here. And so basically, I often thought about Jesus coming from this podunk backwater country, or city, town, village. And yes, it was a very small town, maybe 500 people, but he was living right along, I guess, like modern day I-80 interstate. You know, this is a major thoroughfare across the land of Israel, linking the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan Valley. And then also you had this the Via Maris coming down as well in close proximity. So he was living in a fairly, trade routes caravans would have been coming through here, so he was living in a pretty economically vibrant area in terms of international trade, and that might account for how he gets to know other customs, probably learn some Greek, what have you. That we'll talk more about Jesus' experience and where he was situated there in Nazareth later on, but that'll give you a good sense of the importance of location for his own formation, if you will, and understanding of the world. This map's trying to show you the different sides of the typography. We have the coastal plain, and we're going to unpack these in the succeeding slides, but just to give you kind of a pictorial overall of it, this is the coastal plain with this strip of geography. Over here will be what we'll call the Scheffel, which we'll talk about, and then Central Highlands. And again, you can see the Jezreel Valley that bisects the Central Highlands, and then also the Galilean Highlands up on the top here. And then we can see the Jordan Valley. So really what you have is a number of strips of land, very distinct typography running from north to south, the Central Plain, the Scheffel, the Highlands, and then the Jordan Valley. And we're going to walk through each of those in turn. All right. And you can see over here the same map. It gives you another sort of portrayal of this. Again, the Jezreel Valley, the way along the sea in the coastal plain, and then also the Central Highlands, and then the Jordan Valley. And then, of course, this is Jordan on this side of the Jordan Valley, the Jordan River. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Somehow it happened again. My apologies. All right. So let's talk about each one of these strips of land. Let's talk first about the coastal plain, which is, again, alongside the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. The northern coastal plain stopped right here at Mount Carmel, the Mount Carmel Range, and particularly back in the ancient times, the sea was actually about a half mile farther east this way. And while there's a road right now that kind of skirts around the horn here, back then the water therefore would have been higher, and this really would have been rather difficult to get over. You could get over it, but that's why people would go down the Jordan River, the Jezreel Valley, and then come across the pass that's available through the mountains at Jezreel, right? At Megiddo. Okay. And so we can kind of see this pathway down the Jordan River, past Hatzor, which is right here, coming along here, and then cutting across and getting to the back to the central coastal plain. The The coastal plain continued then past Mount Carmel and the Carmel Range, came down through here. So there's very flat land, which often happens along sea coasts. And although in Old Testament time you did have pine forests and you had certain swampy areas, that didn't inhibit some travel, and you had to navigate that. Interesting enough, we have very few mentions of this coastal plain in the Old Testament. Probably a good reason for that is that you have the Philistines really occupying this part of the coastal plain. And Joppa would be right about here. Joppa was a natural port, and it's basically where modern day Tel Aviv is at. But this would be, once you got into the coastal plain, a major international trade route along the coastal plain. But it doesn't seem as if Israel had great control over this, either because of the Philistines or Egypt or Assyria would control this area then, when they were not, Israel or Judah were not controlling that area. If we move on, then we can go to the Scheffel. So this is this area right here. You can see it's pretty much the same size as the Dead Sea. So it's not really a full strip. Our other strips go from north to south, but this one's just sort of this smaller region. And the Scheffel is a really beautiful area of the country. It was also very rich. So this is a very disputed area because it's good farmland, good grazing land, grassland. It's getting a lot of rain because you have the rain the precipitation, the clouds hitting the highlands, and the rain comes down on this side and flows towards the sea more than it does on this side. So this gets more rain. So this is a very agriculturally rich area. And so it is often an area of dispute. As we read the story of David, this is where it's in this area, the Scheffel, that you have the battle between the Philistines and the tribes of Israel. It's the battle between David and Goliath is in this Scheffel area. Some people call it Scheffel, or some people pronounce this Scheffel. So anyway, that's how you pronounce the vowels. I'm sorry, the syllables. One city that existed within the Scheffel is Lachish, and this was the second most important city in the territory of Judah, the kingdom of Judah, because it's trying to control this very agriculturally rich area. And it was so important that, in fact, Sennacherib, when he defeated Lachish in 701, when he goes back to his palace, he commissions an artist to depict his defeat of Lachish and put it within the panels of his palace. So clearly a key city from the Assyrians' perspective, very important strategic location. The next strip we want to look at is the Central Highlands. Now we're going to talk about what's underneath the red, but the strip runs all the way north to south. But first, let's talk about the Upper Galilee and the Lower Galilee, because there's really three different parts of this Central Highlands, and the first part is the Galilean region. The Upper Galilee, the mountains are higher; they get as high as 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet higher than the lower ones, so significantly different. So here we have Mount Tabor at 588 feet above sea level, and we have other places as high as even more than 1,200 feet above sea level. We have some at 1,500 feet in this area, up in the northern part. So it's not very accessible, this Upper Galilee region. But the Lower Galilee is a little more accessible. The mountains spread out, so you have more valleys. And even today, as you travel through the Lower Galilee, you'll see some beautiful farmland in between these mountains. This was really an area that was under pressure from the north, since it did have some value. from the Syrians and Assyrians would be interested in this territory. And so a lot of the battles between the north and between Israel, which is the kingdom to the north, and from their northern neighbors was in this area. But that said, we don't have a lot of mention of the cities up here. We have some discussion about some battles at Mount Tabor, but even though it's a key strategic area, it's not mentioned a ton. I make mention in the slide here that this Artabellus in 103 incorporates this into the Jewish state. So the Galilee region was sort of this in-between land between, even though this was Israel, since it had this pressure from the north, it wasn't always considered Jewish. This will be important when we talk about the time of Jesus, because it gets repopulated by Jewish population during the time of Herod. And we can imagine, in fact, that Jesus' family was an immigrant family, a migrant family that moved from Bethlehem into the lower Galilee because of the opportunities opened up when it started to become underneath Jewish control. So, as we said, we have the Upper Galilee, and then, of course, the Jezreel Valley. The Upper Galilee area and Lower Galilee area, and then this is separated by this Jezreel Valley, and then we continue on the Central Highlands, which we'll see in this next slide. As you can see, I've now put in red the Upper Galilee region, and we're focusing upon this part of the Central Highlands. You have in the northern part the Sumerian, and then the Bethel Hills or mountains, this is really the heart of the northern kingdom of Israel that we see in the biblical text. Shechem is up here, and Bethel is down here towards the south, but this is really the key territory for the northern kingdom of Israel. Then, if we go south of the Bethel Hills, we get to the Hebron Hills. And this would be the area of Judah. So the ancient nation of Judah had these highlands, these central highlands. Everything above this sort of line would be Israel, kingdom of Israel. Everything below this line is kingdom of Judah. And here you have some more broad valleys. You have Jerusalem at 2,400 feet above sea level, and so it's fairly high. And you do have, so think about that, this dramatic drop from Jerusalem down to the Dead Sea. It's almost 3,000 feet as you go below sea level. All right, and then you flow into the Negev, which is really this desert area to the south. Our next strip is the Jordan Valley. It stretches pretty much from the city of Dan all the way down to the Dead Sea. The Jordan River itself, which starts up by Dan and runs through here into the Sea of Galilee, down all the way to the Dead Sea, runs for about 65 miles. As we already talked about, this valley was significantly controlled by Hatzor or Hazor, right about here. Previously, until the modern state of Israel, there was another little lake here, marshy lake, Lake Hula. And so this area was fairly swampy. Modern day context, if you go, it's a pretty self-contained river. But they filled in, modern state of Israel filled in Lake Hula, so it no longer exists to make it into agricultural land. This is a very rich agricultural area as well. When you hit the Sea of Galilee, or also called Lake Kinneret, the reason that's called that is in Hebrew the word kanor means harp, and you can see how this looks kind of like a harp, particularly the shape of lyres, the kind of harp, handheld harp that was played in ancient times. This has that shape, and hence the name. Kanor has the same letters as Kinneret. And so that's what the lake of the harp, I guess you could literally translate this. It really is a lake, not a sea. It's 12 miles long, and it's 5 miles wide. Again, to give you some sort of frame of reference, Lake Winnebago is twice as big that in Wisconsin. It's 30 miles wide and 30 miles long and 10 miles wide. So it's really not a huge lake. I mean, it's substantial, it's big, but here in Wisconsin we have a lake that's twice its size, our biggest lake in the state. The Sea of Galilee is 600 feet below sea level, so we've already had a fairly dramatic drop from Mount Hermon all the way down to the Sea of Galilee, and we'll go farther south below sea level with the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is very rarely mentioned in the Old Testament, which is, of course, it's a key site of Jesus' ministry. The Dead Sea is 1,200 feet below sea level, so I guess I should correct my previous statement. So I was just reading this 400 feet at this moment, but it's at the mouth of the Jordan, but it goes down below to 1,200 feet below sea level. So to correct my statement earlier, that drop is by land to 400 feet, but if you go to the bottom of the sea, you're going down to 1,200 feet below sea level. It's very high salt and mineral content. If you ever go to the Dead Sea, you probably are well aware, you float. If you've ever been to the Great Salt Lake in Utah, you've probably had that experience as well, but this is even more buoyant than that. If you go south of the Dead Sea, you're still continuing the Rift Valley, goes all the way into Africa, and it starts to slowly rise up to about 650 feet above sea level. That's the end of our presentation of the geography and typography of Israel. Again, geography significantly affects not just politics, but also culture. This hopefully gives you some sense of the land that Jesus, as well as all the Old Testament stories, took place in. Thanks.